Good afternoon. Welcome to Medyascope TV. Just a day before World Press Freedom Day, we're very happy to host John Yearwood in our studio today. Mr. Yearwood is the chairman of the International Press Institute, the IPI, the CEO of the Yearwood Media Group, and the former world editor of the Miami Herald. Welcome, Mr. Yearwood.
Thank you very much. Great to be with you.
So can you tell us a bit about your institution, the International Press Institute, what it does, what its main mission is, and how it functions?
Happy to. Well, first, thanks for having me. I appreciate it. The International Press Institute is an organization that dates to 1950. And it started when a group of leading editors from newspapers, both in the United States and Europe, and in fact Asia as well, came together in Washington, D.C., and decided that they should create an organization that looks at and tracks free press issues around the world. Now, what we try to do, IPI defends, preserves, and expands free press around the world. And as I said, we've been engaged in that now since 1950. The organization started in New York. Our headquarters subsequently moved to London, and now it's in Vienna. Right in the heart of Vienna. One of the things that the organization has done over the years, we've even been nominated for a Nobel Peace Prize, partly because we were the organization behind the scenes that was able to bring Konrad Adenauer and Charles de Gaulle together for their very first meeting. So we've done a lot, and we're very, very proud. And as you might imagine, and we'll be talking about this more, that work continues.
So the IPI, we're told, is holding a World Congress titled Why Good Journalism Matters next month in Nigeria. Can you give us some more information and details about this Congress and why it's important?
Well, we're really excited about this particular Congress because we are returning to sub-Saharan Africa. It has been about 4 years since we were in Africa. Our last meeting was in Cape Town. And we thought that the time was right to return to Africa, and we are going to be in Nigeria and being hosted by our Nigerian National Committee. Now, it's as part of that World Congress, the first day of the Congress, we're having an Africa Media Summit, and that's an opportunity to learn from African media in terms of what they have been doing and what has been successful, what has worked for African media, because too often we feel that we can't learn anything from Africa. So I'm really excited to learn from our African media partners and colleagues about what's been working for them. For example, I have just come from being in both Senegal and Gambia and talking to journalists there in preparation in advance of the summit and our Congress. And they're very excited about coming and sharing with us some of the things that have worked for them. And we'll have journalists there from throughout the continent as part of the summit. But in addition to that, too, they'll be interacting with journalists from Europe, Asia, the Americas, and then particularly on the second day where we talk a lot about free press issues. And it would be a great opportunity for us to learn from each other. So I hope that you can come.
Oh, well, I hope and I wish I could. So before we start talking about the World Press Freedom Day and the problems threatening free media, not only in Turkey, but also in the world, let's talk a bit about Afghanistan, where 9 journalists were killed on Monday in a blast. What's going on in Afghanistan, and why are journalists being targeted?
Well, that was a devastating and very unfortunate attack. ISIS is believed to be behind it, and IPI put out a statement after that attack in which we condemn the attack on journalists. As you know, in terms of why the casualty number was so high, is because they specifically targeted journalists. There was the first blast, and then the second blast occurred where someone was pretending to be a journalist, and that person was in the midst of all the other journalists who had responded to cover the attack. And that's one of the things that's really scary for journalists working in conflict zones, sometimes in places like Afghanistan, you're not quite sure, unless you know this person is a journalist and you've worked with them, you're not quite sure who's around you who might be wearing an explosive device. And that's what caused the 9 journalists' lives in this case. What IPI has called on is authorities in Afghanistan to do everything that they can to find those responsible and bring them to justice.
Well, let's get to Turkey now, and let's focus on IPI's work on Turkey. IPI, your institution, has launched a platform titled #FreeTurkeyJournalists. Can you tell us a bit more about this initiative and what it aims?
Well, first of all, let me say that IPI has been working in Turkey for decades. We've been here a very, very long time. And our work, as you indicated, has intensified in recent years because the threat against journalism and journalists in this country has increased in recent years. And particularly with the arrest of the Cumhuriyet journalists, which was something unlike we've seen almost anywhere before, we thought that we need to get more aggressive and more engaged. And by the way, let me say, it's not just IPI, but a number of international free press organizations have gotten very deeply engaged in Turkey. But when you look at particularly what happened last week, after the courts came back with some verdicts which we thought were, quite frankly, outrageous, where all, with the exception of 3 of the journalists who had been arrested, were convicted. We think that Turkey certainly can do better, and we'll continue to monitor the situation here. But because of all of that, and then as you know, the Cumhuriyet journalists were in prison for, in some cases, well over a year. So we think that it's time that we intensify our work in Turkey, and as part of that, we've launched this campaign, which has several different prongs to it.
Mm-hmm. And just yesterday, the IPI published an online statement declaring solidarity with Kadri Gürsel, who is an executive board member at the IPI, along with other Cumhuriyet journalists who have recently been found guilty on terror charges and who have been in prison for over a year, for some of them, as you've just said. So can you tell us more about the IPI statement on this issue and its position?
Well, IPI, in fact, I have been involved in IPI for quite some time, and this is about as strong a statement that we have released on any of the various crises that we're facing around the world as it relates to journalists. But we thought it was important that we release a strong statement that, one, supports the journalists at Cumhuriyet, to make them know, one, that IPI is with them, that we hear them, and we'll continue to support them, and make them also aware that the international community, not just IPI, but the international community is with them, and to let them know that we also think that the only crime they committed was practicing journalism, which, as you know, is not a crime. And we have said that, and said that repeatedly. Journalism is not a crime. But if you look at what the government did, it arrested them for practicing journalism. And we think it's really critical that they know that we think they did not commit a crime. And so we wanted, in fact, one of the things that we said in this statement, which I think it's important for your listeners to hear, and your viewers to hear, says, we said in part, the sentence against our fellow executive board member, Kadri Gürsel, is an attack on us all. It is an insult to those of us who have dedicated our professional life to the type of independent, critical, public interest journalism that Kadri, Murat, Ahmed, and their colleagues at Cumhuriyet have worked to deliver every day. And one other thing that I think you should know is that we said, we know that the Cumhuriyet defendants did not commit a criminal offense. All they did was journalism of the highest quality, which make us all so proud to count Kadri as a member of our executive board and to also count the various Cumhuriyet journalists as members of our community. I think it's really, we thought, and one of the things that I did in being here in Istanbul was to go over to Cumhuriyet and read the statement to the senior leadership there so that they know that IPI is with them and IPI supports them and that the international community will continue to do everything that we can to get these outrageous verdicts overturned on appeal.
So, apart from this statement and the Free Turkey Journalists Initiative, what other countries or areas does the IPI focus its work on?
Well, IPI is working in a number of countries, and I'll just mention a couple, not just countries, but also issues. Let's start with Egypt. IPI has launched a Press Egypt campaign in which we're trying to get the journalists who have been arrested in Egypt, there are hundreds of them, freed. Among them is Mahmoud Hussein from Al Jazeera and Shakan, who is a photographer. In fact, Shakan was just received a major award from UNESCO, which is also sending a strong signal that many of these journalists who are in prison in Egypt ought not to be there. In fact, they not only should be home with their families, but they should also be practicing the profession for which many of them not only were trained, but which they love. So we're doing a number of things in Egypt, including an online campaign in which we are profiling some of the journalists in jail and continuing to bring global attention to what Egypt is doing. In addition to that, we have something that would be of particular interest to you because you're a largely online operation, is that we have an online campaign called On the Line, in which we're working with journalists to prevent harassment of journalists in the field. And in cases where that has happened, we've provided a tremendous amount of support to journalists around the world, because as I'm sure you know, working in that space, online harassment is becoming a bigger and bigger issue and something that we all have to confront. So through our On the Line campaign, we have been working to help provide support to journalists, both men and women, by the way, who are being harassed online.
So before we start wrapping up, and this may come as a question with very obvious answers to you, but still I'd like to proceed with asking the question. What, in your opinion, are the main obstacles against press freedom, not only in Turkey, but around the world as of 2018?
Well, one of the issues that we have to confront, and really confront it boldly, is there are a number of governments around the world. And we talked about Turkey, we talked about Egypt. Not long ago, I was in Zambia, where President Lungu decided on the eve of the elections to shut down one of the independent newspapers in the country because he didn't like what they were reporting and under spurious tax issues. And then you look at places like Venezuela, where you see the government is not allowing members of the media that doesn't like to buy newsprint. So in terms of that's one of the areas that we have to look at in terms of working with international institutions so that they ensure that many of these governments adhere to and respect international free press conventions. That's one area. And then in some cases where governments are not, there are unstructured governments involved, we have combatants like ISIS that we talked about before, that is killing journalists in places like Afghanistan and other places like around the world where we have combatants without formal structures, and that's another area that we have to confront. And then another issue that has taken on a lot of currency lately is fake news. and what's happening in that space, and making sure that that the news that the consumers get is accurate and it's credible. You know, I talk a lot about, you know, people talk about social media. Again, something of interest to you. But I often refer to it as social chatter. I grew up in the Caribbean, and in one of the areas we had a town square where, you know, people gather at the town square and you hear some things. In fact, some people tell you you don't believe what you hear at the town square. Increasingly, I see social media as sort of the town square. But it's, instead of it being media and credible information, it's more chatter. And I try to tell people that a lot of what you hear in social media, it is not done by credible journalists. It's just people talking, and that's chatter. So you have to really account for that when you decide what you want to believe. So that's another area that that we're working on, as a, you know. So and then some people say, okay, as a result, a lot of what they see is fake news that's coming in from credible media organizations. Certainly, while there is some of that, a lot of what people are seeing are just chatter on the internet, and then they think that it's news. It's absolutely not.
Thank you very much, Mr. Yearwood, for being with us in our studio today and for your comments.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate it, and good luck to you, and I certainly hope to see you in Abuja.
Thank you very much. That's all from our exclusive interview today with Mr. John Yearwood. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.